You ever wonder what it feels like to be free? And still not count, I'm your bedtime historian. And tonight, we slip into the olive-scented air of ancient Athens, a place that worshipped wisdom, debated everything, and yet left most people out of the conversation entirely. It's the cradle of democracy, sure, but not for you. You'll hear shouts from the agora, where votes echo like thunder, except your voice is missing. You'll pass statues honoring brave citizens, none of whom would recognize your worth. And while the city celebrates freedom, your feet remain fixed to the margins. Why did they cheer so loudly for liberty while living in chains of silence? Who got to speak and who was simply expected to listen? If that paradox gently rattles your brain like pebbles in a clay cup, perhaps click, like, and subscribe. You might not be a citizen of Athens, but you're always welcome here. Ever feel like you're the ghost at someone else's festival? That's the vibe tonight. Care to haunt with me? Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle into Athens just after sunrise, sandals kicking up chalky dust. The city's marble gleams temples rise like frozen thunderbolts, and everywhere men in white chitons gesture and argue. They're citizens full ones. And unless you're an adult male born to two Athenian parents, you are not. In this democracy, only about 10–15% of the population qualify as citizens. That's right, nearly everyone else is excluded. Women slaves and resident foreigners, medics, can't vote, hold office, or even speak in public assemblies. You as a visitor, or worse, a servant, don't even count in the census. Not as a number, not as a voice. You might be a woman confined to the home, peering out behind wooden shutters at the noisy world below. Or maybe you're a medic craftsman, paying taxes for the right to live here, yet still denied land property or political power. Slaves. They're invisible altogether, legal non-entities. If you're lucky, you serve wine. If not, you're digging in a mine. Historians still debate how much the average Athenian cared about this imbalance. Some argue the exclusion was simply the norm, as natural as breathing. Others suggest growing unrest, especially among the disenfranchised, nudged reform and resistance in small, unseen ways. Still, no written voice from a silenced woman or a medic teenager survives. They left fingerprints, but no diary entries. A quirky detail. In Athens, citizens received a small payment just for attending the assembly. Democracy came with a day's wage, but only if you qualified. Imagine walking past the pay line every morning, knowing the democracy you live under pays men to rule your fate while you sweep their floors. The irony is heavy. You live in one of the most admired cities in world history, yet you can't influence even the smallest civic choice. You see decisions made in grand theaters of rhetoric, while your own life is governed in shadows and whispers. A city of freedom where most breathe through a veil. This doesn't mean your days are empty. You still love, labor, pray, raise children. But politically, you are air-felt needed, but unseen. The contradiction pulses through every stone. Temples honor equality under the gods, yet laws forbid your name in legal contracts. Philosophers speak of justice, but avoid eye contact with you in court. You begin to wonder if the agora, the city center, isn't really a heart at all, but a gated nerve, where only the right voices fire signals. You notice over time how the excluded create their own quiet languages. A side glance here, a shared sigh there. Small acts of rebellion, offering counsel in hushed corners, teaching daughters to read when no one's looking. You're not alone, not really. You're part of a silent majority stitched together by stolen moments and invisible threads. And so, as the Athenian sun climbs higher and the assembly gathers once more without you, you don't shout. You listen. You learn. You outlast. The agora is bustling again, but this time your feet lead you elsewhere, down narrow alleys, through low doorways, into the places where voices are muffled and names forgotten. You're headed underground, not metaphorically, but literally, into the silver mines of Lorien, where the true cost of Athenian splendor is chipped from rock. Slavery in ancient Greece wasn't hidden, but it was seldom described in detail by those in power. To the average Athenian citizen, slaves were property as ordinary as a clay jug or a kitchen ladle. You wouldn't find long debates about their rights or welfare in the assembly. Their suffering was woven into daily life too dull and constant to spark outrage. You meet your first enslaved person before breakfast. She's grinding grain at dawn arms, stiff from yesterday's work. She doesn't speak much. Slaves weren't allowed to testify in court unless tortured first. The logic truth apparently could only be beaten out of someone with no legal identity. Some historians argue not all slaves lived in misery. Household slaves, in wealthier homes, may have had more stability, perhaps even affection. But even in those softer settings, one fact remains: they could be sold separated from family or punished at any moment. Security built on silence is no comfort at all. And then there's the mines. You descend into darkness, shoulder brushing limestone. The air grows still and thick. In Lorien, thousands of slaves, mostly boys, work without sunlight. They crouch in shafts no taller than a kneeling man hacking at veins of silver, with picks barely wider than a spoon. Days blur. Meals are crusts. The only light comes from oil lamps, and the only escape is collapse. Your chest tightens at the thought of breathing soot and silence for 10 years straight. It's a haunting image, and yet these mines funded the very coins that paid citizen stipends. Democracy was minted in suffering. Philosophers praised Athens as a beacon of rational freedom, even as its foundation was quarried by the shackled. There's a small debate among scholars whether some mine slaves were state-owned or privately leased, but no one disputes the cruelty. The walls of these tunnels bear no carvings, no graffiti, just wear patterns from tired feet and blunt tools. A strange little detail: some wealthy Athenians gave their slaves Greek names, often mythological. It was a thin coat of dignity over the iron grip of ownership. You might meet an enslaved woman named Hera, sweeping temple floors she's not allowed to prey upon. Or a boy called Hermes, running messages in chains. Above ground, slavery remained invisible in plain sight. Markets sold people beside olives and fish. Children born to slaves were slaves. Escape was rare. Even manumission formal release usually came with strings: obedience, lifelong loyalty, a second-class life under a new name. Back in the city, you notice how few monuments commemorate these lives. You won't find bronze statues of mine workers in the plazas, or poetry etched in marble for those who died hauling marble themselves. A society that treasured the written word left almost none for the people who cleaned the ink jars. And still, they endured. You pass a kitchen where a girl stirs lentils while softly humming an unfamiliar tune. It's not in Greek, perhaps Thracian, maybe Lydian. It reminds you each enslaved person brought their own language, memories, and gods to the city. Athens absorbed them all, repurposed them, then forgot their names. But their stories quiet, as they are echo beneath every polished statue, every coin, every scroll. They built a city that refused to see them. But you do. The clamor of the agora fades behind you, as you slip through a shaded courtyard where pomegranate trees rustle faintly in the breeze. Here, you're invited into a domestic world that history barely whispered about, a space ruled not by senators or philosophers, but by women. And yet, for all their labor and rituals, they held no legal voice. Athenian women lived under strict guardianship. From birth until death, they were controlled by a male relative father, husband, or son. They couldn't vote, couldn't own land, couldn't even appear in court without a male representative. Public life. That was for men. A woman's place, quite literally, was behind the scenes, indoors, behind curtains, away from strangers. And yet, paradoxically, they were the linchpins of home life and religious ceremony. The paradox would be funny if it weren't so familiar, invisible in politics, indispensable in practice. You pass a room where a woman is weaving. She's been at it since before dawn, turning raw wool into a cloak that her husband will wear to the assembly she's barred from attending. Her fingers move without pause, her face calm but unreadable. Weaving wasn't just domestic work, it was symbolic. In myths, women wove fates-told stories with thread. In real life, they wove silence. There's debate among scholars about just how restricted Athenian women really were. Some point to exceptional cases, wealthy priestesses, or hetairai, the educated courtesans who mingled with philosophers. Others argue those were rare exceptions used to excuse widespread limitation. The surviving records were written by men after all. The truth is likely hidden behind those looms. A quiet, overlooked detail: women couldn't even pick their own husbands. Marriages were arranged, and dowries were carefully negotiated like business deals. Imagine being bartered like land expected to bear children, run a household, and disappear behind a name not even yours. But they didn't vanish. You follow one woman into a dim room filled with clay vessels, each bearing symbols of household gods. She lights a lamp and whispers a prayer over a fig offering. Women, despite their invisibility in politics, were central to religious life. They led domestic rituals, celebrated festivals, and upheld moral order, not because the law said they should, but because nobody else would. Take the Thesmophoria, a 3-day fertility festival honoring Demeter and Persephone. Only married women could attend. They chanted, fasted, and even buried symbolic pig remains, yes, pig remains, in sacred pits to ensure the cycle of life continued. The city trusted women with the fate of the harvest, but not with a vote. And yet you sense a resilience here. In stories whispered to daughters in the way an old woman presses a sprig of myrtle into your palm, smiling like she knows something the magistrates don't. These women built a parallel world, quiet, enduring, full of coded power. A final oddity: women weren't even given real names in most legal documents. They were listed as daughter of so-and-so or wife of this man. It's like trying to track someone through a fog made of other people's names. But even unnamed, they shaped the city. Behind every public man was a woman who fed him, dressed him, advised him in private. She may have never stood in the assembly, but her voice echoed in his. She couldn't make laws, but she made lawmakers. So as you sit under the pomegranate tree once more, you wonder, what if the quietest voices are the ones still reverberating the longest? You're led from the quiet courtyards of women's rituals to another kind of initiation. This one, harsher, colder, and carved into the bones of childhood. In ancient Greece, growing up wasn't tender. It was a gauntlet. And whether you were a Spartan boy bracing for lashes or an Athenian child reciting poetry till your throat cracked, there was little room for delight. Let's begin with Sparta. Here boys were enrolled in the Agog, a state-run training system that prized toughness over tenderness. From age 7, they left their families to live in barracks with other boys. Their hair was shaved, their clothes minimal, their food deliberately insufficient. Hunger was a teacher, pain was a tutor, and stealth, that was survival. You hear whispers about a rite where boys are whipped at the altar of Artemis, Orthia, until they collapse. Spectators cheer. The winner is the one who doesn't cry. Some scholars still argue whether these brutal floggings were symbolic tests or literal blood sport. Either way, bruises became the curriculum. Oddly, this cruelty wasn't considered cruelty at all. It was patriotism, body and soul, forged for the state. You weren't raising boys. You were manufacturing warriors. Athens, by contrast, thought itself more refined. But don't mistake refinement for mercy. Education here was strict and memorization heavy. Boys were taught to recite Homer by heart line after aching line. Physical training was still required, wrestling, discus, javelin, but the true battleground was the mind. And discipline ruled both arenas. A quirky little fact: Athenian boys carried wax tablets and styluses like ancient iPads used to copy down lessons. And if they erred, they might feel the sting of a cane across the palms. Schools were private and costly, so if your family lacked funds, education ended at the alphabet. Girls, they were schooled at home if at all, maybe taught to spin weave and manage a household skills passed quietly from mother to daughter in back rooms with no blackboard. There was no formal curriculum, only expectations. There's debate over how uniform these childhood experiences truly were. Some historians suggest wealthier boys had gentler upbringings with music and dance lessons. Others insist that across class lines, one lesson always endured obedience. You did what you were told, or you suffered. You stroll through a narrow street where children play a game called ephedrismos, something like leapfrog, but with stones. Laughter bubbles up, but there's a nervous edge. Childhood joy existed, yes, but it was rationed. At any moment, it could be replaced by a chore, a punishment, or a lesson in keeping silent. Even infants weren't guaranteed a start in life. In both Athens and Sparta, newborns were inspected. If weak, deformed, or simply unwanted, they might be exposed, left outside the city, unprotected to die, or be taken in by strangers. Some were rescued and sold as slaves. The line between child and commodity was fragile. One overlooked custom children weren't named until the 7th or 10th day after birth. This delay reflected uncertainty. Would the baby survive? Naming too soon might tempt the gods or fate. And so you walk past a household shrine where a small garland hangs. It marks a naming day, a child who made it through the silent trial of infancy. You wonder what lies ahead for them: a whip in Sparta, a poem in Athens, or simply a short life full of long rules. Childhood in ancient Greece wasn't about discovery. It was about preparation. You didn't grow into yourself. You were shaped by fear, by duty, by myth. From the schoolyard to the workshop, your path now veers into the working lives of ancient Greeks, where labor wasn't a ladder, but a loop, endless and exhausting. Romantic visions of marble sculptors and wise philosophers crumble quickly once you step into a potter's kiln or a farmer's dusty grove. Most people didn't dream. They worked, and work, frankly, was miserable. You enter a cramped pottery shop in Athens, where the air is thick with smoke and sweat. The potter crouches over his wheelback, hunched like a drawn bowstring. His hands are caked in red clay, his eyes watery from the fumes. Every amphora he shapes might carry wine to a symposium or oil to the marketplace, but his lungs pay the price. Lead-based glazes give the pots a lovely shine, but the price is invisible poisoning. And still, there's no mask, no gloves, no break. Artisans weren't celebrated, they were serviceable. Even those who created beauty never escaped the grime behind it. Historians note that manual labor was viewed as undignified for citizens, which meant much of it fell to medics, freedmen, or slaves. Citizens who did work did so quietly or with resentment. The ideal Athenian wasn't a farmer or a smith. He was a landowner living off the toil of others. But most weren't ideal. They were just tired. Out in the countryside, the farmer's lot wasn't much better. You join a man tending olive trees under the blazing Mediterranean sun. His tunic sticks to him with sweat, and the soil beneath his sandals is cracked and cruel. He bends, lifts harvests, and repeats. There's no shade, no off-season, just the pulse of sowing and reaping and hoping the rain gods are in a generous mood. There's scholarly debate about how many citizens actually farmed their own land versus leasing it to others. Some suggest rural independence was a kind of myth in itself, glossing over how many farmers fell into debt or servitude when crops failed. Others argue the small farmer was real, but always a whisker away from ruin. A peculiar little fact tools were rarely sharpened by the user. Blacksmiths did that. So if your sickle dulled mid-harvest and the smith was busy, you waited or hacked anyway. Productivity bowed to availability. You stop by a dye workshop and nearly gag at the smell. That lovely purple robe worn by elites. It comes from murex snails crushed by the thousands rotting in vats. The stench curls your nose hairs. The dye maker's hands are stained forever. Beauty once again has a brutal cost. Wages inconsistent. Protections none. Retirement a fantasy. Most people worked until they couldn't, and then relied on family if they had any, or simply faded away from the records like drying ink. A curious custom, some tradespeople left painted signs above their doorways, not just to advertise, but to pray. A cobbler might depict a sandal and a small owl, Athena's symbol, hoping divine favor would lead customers his way. Business strategy meets superstition. Back in the city, you pass a stonemason coughing dust into a kerchief. His hands shake. You realize the columns of temples, those eternal symbols of Athenian glory, were cut by hands that rarely lasted a lifetime. There's no escape. Whether you're weaving, hammering, pressing olives, or dyeing cloth, the pattern is the same labor, without ladder effort, without elevation. No promotions, no office birthdays, just the cycle of creation and collapse. You sit down, brush clay dust from your tunic, and exhale. In a world that praised the philosopher and playwright, the workers were the ones who held everything up with blistered hands and unspoken pride. You wander from the smoke-choked kilns and olive groves into the kitchens of the common folk, if they can be called that. Here, the air is filled with the scent of onions, the sharp tang of vinegar, and the occasional hint of something roasting, if you're lucky. For most people in ancient Greece, food wasn't a feast. It was survival, and a fairly beige one at that. Meals in Athens weren't glamorous unless you were wealthy. A typical day began with breakfast, called akritisma, barley bread dipped in diluted wine. Yes, wine for breakfast, but don't get excited. It's more grape-flavored water than Bacchic celebration. Next up, a lunch of figs olives, and if the gods were kind, a slice of cheese. Dinner, or deipnon, was the main event, but for many, it wasn't much different. Porridge again, maybe with leeks, onions, and beans. Salted fish was a treat. Meat, reserved for sacrifices and festivals. And even then, the best cuts went to the priests. The central grain of Greek cuisine was barley, not wheat, which was more expensive and often imported. Barley bread was coarse, dark, and tough, hardly the stuff of dreams. Most people added olive oil or honey when they could. And yes, occasionally lentils or chickpeas appeared mashed into soups that looked suspiciously like sludge. One curious little detail: Athenians didn't use forks. They used fingers, knives, and spoons, though spoons were rare. Bread served double duty as both plate and utensil. Think edible napkin. Your hands were the tools, and your tunic was the sacrifice. There's debate about how well fed the lower classes truly were. Some scholars suggest that even the poorest had consistent, if bland, meals. Others point to archaeological evidence: malnourished skeletons, worn teeth that paints a grimmer picture. The truth probably lies in between: not famine, but definitely no indulgence. You step into a back alley and discover a tavern, not the wine-soaked orgy of imagination, but a small, smoky room with cheap craters of diluted wine, crusty bread, and olives, so wrinkled they look apologetic. Laughter erupts at one table, and for a moment the grayness of the diet is softened by warmth and company. Still, food was political. Only citizens could participate in communal meals, known as syssitia in places like Sparta, mandatory mess halls, where everyone ate the same austere fare. Black broth, made with pork vinegar and blood, was the Spartan specialty. Foreigners who tasted it often gagged. Even some Spartans did. A quirky festival tradition during the Anthesteria, an Athenian festival for Dionysus' children, were given their first taste of wine from tiny ceremonial jugs. It wasn't about fun. It was about welcoming them into the community of future drinkers and citizens. One sip, one step closer to adult disappointment. Back at the market, you overhear a woman haggling for onions and garlic. These, along with leeks, were the flavor heroes of ancient kitchens. But they also earned you social judgment. Garlic breath wasn't romantic in the 5th century BCE either. Philosophers often warned against eating too much of it before public speaking. Imagine losing a debate because your opponent was offended by your aroma. And desserts. They existed barely. Honey was the only sweetener used sparingly. Occasionally, nuts or sesame seeds would be mashed into a treat, but no chocolate, no sugar, no fruit-filled pastries. The idea of a sweet ending was more dream than reality. So you sit beside the hearth, spooning warm lentil mush from a shared bowl, and listen to the crackle of olive wood kindling. It's not elegant, it's not thrilling, but it's enough to get you through another day. In ancient Greece, eating wasn't about taste. It was about staying strong enough to work and keeping just enough energy to pray. You've eaten your fill, or at least filled the hollow with warm mush, and now you're feeling a bit under the weather. Maybe it's that grayish fish from the market stall, or the damp air clinging to your bones. Either way, you're about to meet the medical minds of ancient Greece. Just don't expect healing to be part of the plan. Medicine in classical Athens and beyond was a curious blend of bold theory, herbal guesswork, and divine intervention. You visit a small iatrion, a healer's home-turned clinic, and are greeted by shelves of dried herbs, oddly shaped knives, and one slightly alarming bronze suction cup. The doctor nods as you describe your symptoms, then immediately recommends a purge. That's right. Vomiting, bleeding, or sweating it out. Anything to rebalance your humors. Ancient Greek medicine was based on the idea that your body held four fluids: blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and that sickness came from their imbalance. You're not sick. You're simply too yellow today. Some healers were thoughtful observers. Hippocrates, whose name still echoes in modern medicine, insisted on careful diagnosis, detailed patient logs, and ethical conduct. Others, less so. You might be prescribed a boiled leek plaster, a garlic poultice, or something involving crushed beetles. It all depended on the doctor's training or how convincing he sounded. Scholars continue to debate how widespread Hippocratic methods really were. His teachings were written down, yes, but literacy wasn't universal. Many practitioners relied on tradition or apprenticeships, and temples still competed with clinics, especially the temples of Asclepius, where you might sleep overnight in hopes of a healing dream. You stroll through one such temple, past the statues and incense bowls, into a chamber where the sick lie on stone slabs. Snakes coil around the columns, symbolic of healing, yes, but real ones too, since sacred serpents roamed freely. If you dreamt of the god touching your wound, you might awaken cured, or just covered in mosquito bites. A strange little custom medical tools were often made of bronze and looked more like woodworking gear than surgical equipment. One device, used for extracting arrowheads, resembles a corkscrew. You're not sure which hurts more, the weapon or the removal. And let's not forget midwives. Women often turn to female healers for childbirth or female troubles, though these practitioners weren't formally trained in the Hippocratic tradition. They learned from each other, from grandmothers, from experience. Their knowledge was often dismissed by male doctors, but their success kept them busy. Still, some treatments were worse than the illness. Got a headache? Drill a small hole in the skull to let the spirits out. Bloated stomach? Swallow lead powder. Coughin' up blood. That's probably just your spleen misbehaving. Drink boiled cabbage water and hope for the best. And if the illness lingered, well, sometimes the diagnosis was moral. Maybe you offended a god. Maybe your neighbor cursed you. Magical charms and incantations often accompanied the medicine just in case science failed. Or, made things worse. There's a quiet absurdity here. A society that built logic systems, debated ethics, and studied the stars still treated a fever with goat dung poultices. But this was the paradox of progress: brilliance and blindness side by side. You end the day holding a bundle of herbs that smells like a salad left in the sun too long. You've been bled, sweated, and dosed with something that might have been wine. Maybe. It's hard to tell. And yet somehow, you feel just a little better. Was it the treatment or the ritual of care itself? No one can say for sure. But one thing's clear. In ancient Greece, getting sick was risky, but getting better was often stranger. The doctor's incense still clings to your tunic as you step back into the bright Athenian sun, only to find yourself facing the place you'll return to tonight home. But don't expect a courtyard villa with perfume baths. For most people, in ancient Greece, home was a cramped, crumbly rectangle of mud brick and tile, cozy in theory, chaotic in practice. You duck beneath a sagging lintel into a modest dwelling, probably one of hundreds crammed into the same warren of alleys. The interior is dim, the walls patched and discolored. A single oil lamp casts wobbly shadows against rough plaster. You squint past a low wooden divider. No rooms here, just spaces separated by curtains or instinct. The floors are hard-packed earth. The furniture sparse and handmade. A stool here, a chest there. Beds or thin mats rolled up by day. The kitchen isn't a room, but a corner, marked by a clay hearth, soot-stained walls, and a chipped amphora of olive oil that leaks if you tilt it too far. No plumbing, no latrines, no running water. If you're lucky, there's a shared well nearby. If not, you carry water uphill in clay jugs every morning. Bathing means a cold splash with a jug and a prayer for privacy. If someone else is already using the alley, you wait. A curious little habit some households use: chamber pots at night, basic clay bowls emptied in the morning, hopefully far from the kitchen. Athenian hygiene was more about timing than tools. And public fountains, busy loud, often political. Everyone needs water. Everyone listens. There's scholarly debate about whether women were truly confined to the home, or whether that's just what the surviving texts claim. Archaeological evidence like weaving tools found in public areas suggests more movement than the written rules admit. But even so, home was considered a woman's domain, not sanctuary, responsibility. Outside, a toddler chases a chicken through the dust. Inside, someone is mending sandals while muttering about dry bread. The walls are so thin you hear everything: arguments, prayers, the chorus of snoring from next door. Privacy. It's not part of the architectural plan, and don't get too attached to the structure. These homes eroded easily. Earthquake storms and simple wear could collapse a wall or flood a courtyard. Roofs leaked. Doors stuck. But repairs weren't quick. Materials were expensive, and neighbors often shared walls, so your broken roof might depend on someone else's spare time. You pass a sleeping mat laid directly on the floor, next to a small carved idol of Hestia, goddess of the hearth. She was honored daily with offerings of barley or wine, because in a house like this, a functioning fire was the heart of everything, cooking warmth and a tiny sense of control in a world that offered little. Odd detail: some homes had a gyneceum, a women's space, hidden behind a curtain or screen. But in poorer homes, that line blurred. Everyone shared the same narrow air. Roles persisted, but boundaries dissolved under leaking tiles and unpaid debts. As night falls, you light a second oil lamp and see the glow flicker against soot-marked beams. Outside, a chorus of frogs rises from a flooded ditch, and someone plays a flute badly, but with heart. You breathe in the scent of smoke, bread crust, and dust. This is where philosophers wrote about virtue, where generals returned from war, where children memorized Homer and wives whispered to goddesses in the dark. Not in marble halls, but here, where walls breathe dust and life slips in through the cracks. In ancient Greece, home was neither fortress nor fantasy. It was a thin shelter from the world's noise, and sometimes barely that. It's nighttime now, but don't let the quiet fool you. Peace isn't guaranteed, not even in your sleep. In ancient Greece, fear of the gods didn't fade with sunset. If anything, it deepened. The divine were always watching. And if you sneezed at the wrong time or forgot to pour a libation before supper, they might just strike you down. Religion wasn't a matter of personal belief. It was a communal, constant ritual. You didn't choose your gods. They chose you by birth, by city, by family tradition. Every corner of life was haunted by divine consequence: planting crops, marrying, entering a business deal, or simply walking through a doorway. You stepped wrong, you suffered. You wander past a crossroads where someone has just left an offering: a lump of garlic, a smear of honey, and a tiny figurine made of clay. It's for Hecate, goddess of boundaries and ghosts. No one touches it. To interfere would invite bad luck or worse. One quirky practice before any major decision, many Greeks consulted oracles, dreams, or omens. A sneeze at the wrong time, bad sign. A bird flying left instead of right, cancel your journey. There were even professionals mantics who specialized in reading animal entrails. Yes, liver divination was a real job. Scholars still argue over how much the average Greek actually feared divine retribution versus simply following custom. Some believe the rituals were more social than spiritual. Others insist that fear was genuine and pervasive. After all, temples didn't just honor gods, they bribed them. You stop at a household shrine lit by a flickering oil lamp. A woman mutters prayers as she sprinkles barley on the hearth. It's not dramatic, it's daily. If she skips this, her husband's journey tomorrow might fail. Or her son might catch a fever. The gods weren't just cosmic forces, they were temperamental neighbors. And then there were festivals. Loud, colorful, and mandatory. Skipping a major religious event wasn't just rude, it was dangerous. You might anger the community and the gods at once. The Panathenaea, for instance, honored Athena with torch races, sacrifices, and a grand procession. Miss it, and people noticed. You hear chanting in the distance, perhaps, a Dionysian rite, half sacred, half wild party. Worship of Dionysus blurred the lines between reverence and release. Wine flowed, masks were worn, and sometimes followers claimed divine possession. It was one of the few occasions when women could participate publicly, their roles expanding under moonlight and music. Even illness could be divine punishment. Asclepius, god of healing, required gifts for cure. Apollo might strike with plague. If crops failed or babies died, people didn't ask why, they asked who they had offended. A particularly eerie tradition cursed tablets. People inscribed their grievances, usually revenge wishes, on thin sheets of lead and buried them in graves or sacred wells. May his tongue stick to his teeth reads one. Let her dance shoes break. Passive-aggressive spirituality at its finest. And yet, despite the fear, religion offered comfort. You weren't alone. The gods might be cruel, but they were present. You could pray to Artemis and childbirth Hermes on a journey Hestia for your home. Even the poor left offerings, crumbs, olives, a flower plucked from the road. As you lie on your sleeping mat, the shadows from the oil lamp stretch across the cracked wall. You whisper a final prayer just in case. Maybe to Athena for wisdom. Maybe to Hypnos for sleep. And as your eyes close, a faint breeze rattles the curtain. Was it the wind or something else? In Greece, the line between natural and supernatural was never clear. You slept lightly, watched over, warned, and always wondering. Sleep offers little shelter when war drums are always echoing just beyond the hills. Even as you lie there, your dreams fracture under the weight of obligation. In ancient Greece, conflict wasn't a rare catastrophe, it was a cycle. A near constant hum behind the civic noise, like thunder, that never quite arrives, but never really leaves either. The Greek world was a patchwork of city-states: Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, each proud, independent, and often belligerent. Alliances shifted like sand. You might wake up a friend of your neighbor, and by next month be marching against him. War was less a breaking of peace than a pause in other affairs. As a poor citizen, you weren't exempt. Quite the opposite. When war was declared, you were expected to fight. You packed your gear, said your goodbyes, and left your vineyard, your pottery wheel, or your half-mended roof behind. The state provided little beyond a summons. You brought your own armor, if you had any. A peculiar little fact: many soldiers used family heirloom helmets or hand-me-down greaves, dented and slightly mismatched. They tied sandals tighter and hoped they wouldn't fall apart before the phalanx line formed. For the truly poor, even a spear might be borrowed. You join a troop on the march, a dusty line of men carrying shields the size of doors, and expressions that flicker between bravado and dread. You're not a professional. You're a farmer with a pointy stick. And yet, when the hoplite formation locks together shoulder to shoulder, you're suddenly part of a machine built on trust and choreography. There's scholarly debate over how often full-scale wars erupted versus brief skirmishes or shows of force. But the records are clear. Battle was a central feature of civic life. Every male citizen expected to serve. If not now, then soon. Back in Athens, the city rings with the clatter of blacksmiths, repairing blades, the shouting of strategoi, discussing maneuvers, and the weary sighs of mothers preparing ritual offerings for sons already gone. The goddess Athena watches silently from her marble perch, helmeted and unreadable. Even Sparta, famed for its warrior culture, wasn't a place of endless fighting. It was a place of endless readiness. Boys trained from childhood, as we saw earlier, and men lived in barracks, constantly drilled for defense and conquest alike. But even they suffered when war dragged on. Supplies dwindled, morale cracked, homes sat empty for years. A strange tradition before battle, many Greek soldiers sacrificed animals and read omens in their entrails. If the signs were bad, they might delay. Imagine standing in armor under the beating sun, waiting for a goat's liver to stop being ambiguous. You reach the battlefield, a dry, flat plain. The armies face each other in stiff rows, both sides waiting for the trumpet to signal the charge. There's no long-range artillery, no cavalry flourish. Just the sudden terrible crash of shield against shield, spear against bone. And after the dust settles the grim task of identifying who made it home. And if you did survive, glory wasn't guaranteed. Some veterans returned injured, unable to work. Some were forgotten. Only the heroic dead were immortalized in poems. The rest were buried quietly, names fading before their wounds did. As you leave the field, you pass a broken spear planted in the dirt marking the spot where someone once stood. No statue, no inscription, just silence. War, in ancient Greece, wasn't a tale told at campfires. It was a rhythm that interrupted harvests, childhoods, and dreams. A beat you never fully escaped, only hoped would skip you this time. The battlefield dust hasn't even settled, and already you're summoned to another kind of arena, this time the courtroom. But don't expect marble benches and solemn oaths. Justice in ancient Greece was loud, chaotic, and about as predictable as a goat on market day. Here persuasion mattered more than proof, and shouting louder might just save your life. You approach the Heliaia Athens main court, where 500 randomly chosen male citizens gather to form the jury. That's right, 500. There are no judges, as we'd know them, no lawyers, no impartial referees. Just hundreds of peers, most of whom are illiterate bored, or both ready to render judgment after hearing two amateurs argue. The accused stands nervously in a simple tunic, clutching a wooden tablet. He gets a set time to speak, measured by a water clock called a clepsydra. When the water runs out, so does his defense. It's not about evidence, it's about rhetoric. Can he tell a convincing story? Can he make the jury laugh, cry, or nod? A quirky historical tidbit, some orators hired speechwriters, called logographers, to help them craft the perfect plea. You could buy your defense like a tailored tunic if you could afford it. For the poor hope, you're eloquent. Or pitiful. or funny. And then there's the plaintiff, just as panicked, trying to turn 500 strangers into allies. There's no cross-examination, no legal precedent, just two sides tossing arguments into the wind, hoping enough stick to sway the crowd. If your opponent cried during their speech, well now, you better cry harder. Scholars debate how democratic this system really was. Some argue it gave the common man real power. Others point out that charisma often outweighed truth. Plus, jurors were paid a tiny fee, but enough to attract the idle the elderly, or those just looking for entertainment. Justice served with a side of theater. You glance up at a notice board listing the day's cases: theft, property disputes, slander, and the occasional murder. But even murder trials followed this same logic. No forensic evidence, no impartial judge, just a crowd and a ticking water clock. And if convicted punishments varied, fines, exile, loss of citizenship, or in rare cases, death. Socrates, for example, was famously sentenced to die by drinking hemlock after defending himself with a speech so defiant it likely sealed his fate. Legend says he joked with friends as the poison took effect, a rough way to prove a point. A bizarre detail: Athenians cast their votes using bronze tokens, solid discs for guilty, hollow ones for not guilty. They dropped them into urns, and clerks tallied the count behind curtains. No deliberation, no discussion, just a single silent vote after all the noise. And what of appeals? There weren't any. One trial, one outcome. The crowd moved on to the next case, while you faced exile or execution. Or, if you were lucky, just a heavy fine and the loss of face in your neighborhood. Outside, in the shade of an olive tree, two men argue over a broken cart axle. One waves his arms, the other kicks the wheel. They'll see each other in court tomorrow, not because justice is fair, but because it's available. Loud, public, and terrifying. You walk away from the courthouse with the echo of voices still ringing in your ears. Truth may not win the day, but it'll get a hearing. Maybe. In ancient Greece, justice wasn't blind. She just wore earplugs, carried a water clock, and preferred a good story over cold facts. The trial is over. Judgment rendered. You exhale and think, maybe now things can go back to normal. But there's a cruel statistic lurking beneath the city's sun-drenched rooftops, one that most people in ancient Greece lived, but rarely lived long enough to complain about. You'd probably die young. And no, not metaphorically. The average life expectancy in ancient Greece hovered somewhere around 30 to 35 years. That doesn't mean everyone dropped dead at 32, but the numbers reflect harsh realities. Infant mortality was staggering. Childhood illnesses ran rampant, and few survived past what we now call middle age. You were lucky to grow old. Luckier still to keep your teeth. You pass a graveyard just beyond the city walls. The tombstones are modest, mostly simple stelae, carved with figures of the dead, posed mid-conversation, as if they just paused for eternity. One shows a woman handing a doll to a child. Another shows a man clasping the hand of a younger companion. Love frozen in limestone. Grief too. Scholars debate how common disease outbreaks were, but we know this much: plagues devastated city populations. Athens, in particular, suffered a notorious epidemic during the Peloponnesian War. Thucydides, who lived through it, described people dying within days: boils, fevers, delirium. The sick were abandoned by family. Funeral pyres burned day and night. And beyond plague, there were the everyday threats: infected wounds, childbirth complications, dysentery parasites, famine. A stubbed toe could turn deadly. A difficult delivery might kill both mother and child. Even a cold could tip into catastrophe without antibiotics, clean water, or warm housing. One eerie fact: newborns were often unnamed for days, even weeks. Why name a child you might bury before the month is out? Instead, families waited, observed, then named the survivors. And yet, despite it all, Greeks weren't fixated on death. They made offerings, honored the dead with rituals, and placed coins in the mouths of the deceased fair for Charon the ferryman of the underworld. But they lived urgently, often joyfully, in the brief stretch of years allotted to them. You visit a midwife's house where herbs hang from the rafters and linen cloths are stacked near a low birthing bench. She's weary-eyed but calm. She's seen it all: breech births, stillbirths, blood, and silence. No fanfare, just hope and exhaustion. And when it goes well, a feast. When it doesn't, a burial before sunrise. A quirky tradition: babies were presented to the household gods on the 10th day during a ceremony called the Decate. It marked their official entry into the family. Before that, they were liminal half and half out of life's ledger. And old age, if you reached it, came with its own curses: failing sight, creaking joints, dependence, no pensions, no elder care. You might live with children, or sleep near the hearth if they tolerated you, or beg, or fade away in silence. You sit at the edge of a fountain, where elders gather trading stories of what once was. One has no teeth. Another walks with a carved stick, worn smooth from decades of leaning. They laugh more than you expect. They remember more than you can imagine. Death wasn't feared so much as expected. It loomed not as an enemy, but a neighbor. Always there, always close. And so you rise, knowing that every step on Athenian soil is a small defiance of time. You breathe, you walk, you wonder. And for now, that's enough. In ancient Greece, youth was a flame and death a certainty. But between them, people still danced. As dawn creeps back over the city, you make your way through the still sleepy alleys toward a different kind of public space, not one for debate or sacrifice, but for relief. It's time to confront one of ancient Greece's more humbling realities: public toilets, or more accurately, communal pits with a view. And not the scenic kind. Most Athenian homes didn't have private latrines. If nature called, you either made do with a chamber pot and dumped it discreetly, or you walked carefully and quickly to a shared facility tucked between buildings. These weren't marked with signs or columns. You knew them by smell. You arrive at one such latrine, a low structure with a row of stone slabs, each pierced by a circular hole. No stalls, no privacy, just a bench, a breeze, and the constant threat of awkward eye contact. If your neighbor happened to be your political rival or your fishmonger, so be it. Everyone squatted equally here. A strange little detail: instead of toilet paper, the Greeks used a stick with a sponge on the end called a xylospongium. These were shared, rinsed in a communal water trough, and then reused. You eye one, now damp-frayed and dangling from a rusty nail. Your stomach churns. So does your respect for modern plumbing. Historians still debate how widely these facilities were used, and how often people simply relieved themselves in alleys or over city walls. Sanitation laws existed, but enforcement was spotty. Night soil, the euphemistic term for human waste, was collected and sometimes sold as fertilizer. Urban recycling at its most pungent. You pass a small boy darting out of the alley, sandals wet from something best not questioned. A woman carrying a chamber pot avoids eye contact. Down the street, a man empties his pot from an upper window with a shout, "Watch your head." not just a joke, a legal requirement. You had to warn passers-by before flinging your waste. If you didn't and hit someone, you could be fined, or worse, sued for injury by urine. There's even record of a man taking another to court for throwing excrement out the window and hitting his cloak. The jury sided with the cloak. Justice in this case was scented strongly of vinegar and shame. Despite the indignity, there was a strange social bond in these places. Philosophers claimed that communal toilets made men more equal, no gilded stalls, no embroidered towels, just the shared human need to squat and hope. You weren't judged for where you relieved yourself, only for who you were afterward. And while women generally stayed at home for these needs, even they had to navigate the balance of privacy and practicality. Chamber pots in the women's quarters emptied by slaves or discreetly carried to the alley. For poorer women, the rules bent like the wind unspoken and scented accordingly. A quirky superstition, some people believed that evil spirits lived in latrines. One protection involved whispering charms before sitting down, just in case a mischievous demon decided to poke you where dignity was already scarce. Not exactly gospel, but when the toilet is a pit and the dark is full of gods, a little chant never hurts. You step back from the slab, adjusting your tunic with great care and greater gratitude for breezes. Around you, the city stirs, merchants setting up stalls, children chasing each other past yesterday's leaks. Life carries on undeterred by smell or shame. In ancient Greece, even nature's most basic call came with rules, rituals, and risks. But if you could laugh about it later, you were probably doing just fine. You leave the public latrines behind perhaps a little too quickly and head uphill toward a district where marble sparkles and philosophers argue. But don't be fooled by the grandeur. For most people, life in ancient Greece came with invisible ceilings. No matter how clever, hardworking, or ambitious you were, there was one brutal truth you couldn't just move up. Social mobility, as we understand it, barely existed. Status was mostly inherited fixed like pottery left too long in the kiln. If you were born a medic, a foreign resident, you could work, pay taxes, even become rich, but you'd never become a citizen. If you were born a woman, you could be noble, wealthy, educated, but never vote, own land, or lead. And if you were born a slave, well, freedom was rare. Respect, rarer still. You pass a shop run by a skilled metal worker, a medic who crafts bronze fittings for temples and public works. His craft is excellent, even praised by a local philosopher. But he can't own the land his shop sits on. He can't send his son to the assembly. His taxes are higher. His legacy, no matter how refined his skill, ends at the edge of citizenship. There's debate among historians over whether wealth could occasionally buy upward mobility. In Athens, some medics were granted limited privileges, citizenship bestowed for wartime service, or extreme generosity. But these were exceptions. Rare. Symbolic. Like statues made for statuesque purposes, only admired but not imitated. A peculiar social habit, people rarely spoke openly about ambition. To strive above your station could be seen as hubris, the pride that offended the gods. Better to accept your place, honor your household gods, and live quietly. Pride was a risk, humility a strategy. You watch a young boy born to a citizen family reciting Homer outside a schoolhouse. His future is open-mapped, celebrated. A few streets over, another boy, born to a freed slave, delivers olive oil and speaks perfect Greek. But no matter how fluent, he'll never recite lines in the assembly. Talent meant little without the right ancestry. Women, too, bore this invisible weight. Even those born into elite families remained voiceless in politics. Some were educated at home. A few participated in religious festivals. But to rise in society meant marrying well and raising sons who could speak in public. Daughters of citizens were vessels for lineage, not legacies of their own. And slaves. They were sometimes freed, yes, but even freedmen remained second tier. Their names were recorded as formerly the property of, their children inherited the stigma. A man who once mined silver might end his life sweeping the stoop of a temple free in theory but never honored. You sit at the edge of the Pnyx, where public speakers gather. The view of Athens below is breathtaking rows of rooftops, marketplaces, buzzing temples glowing in afternoon light. And yet, this was a view for the few. The people who lived in the shadows of those rooftops, they could see the Pnyx, but rarely stood on it. A quirky inscription carved into stone nearby catches your eye. It's not a law or a dedication, just a name repeated over and over. A man practicing his own identity, hoping the stone might outlive the silence of his station. In ancient Greece, the ladder of status wasn't broken. It was never there to begin with. You lived the life you were born into. And for most, that meant dreaming vertically in a world built flat. And yet, despite it all, the silence of women, the weight of war, the fear of gods, the hopelessness of birthright, there was something in ancient Greece that let people breathe beyond their limits. You feel it now, as you step into a dusky amphitheater where shadows lengthen and torches flicker. The stone is cold, the bench is hard, but no one complains. Tonight, there's a play. This is where Athens lets its citizens, medics, even slaves imagine something else, if only for a few hours. The tragedies and comedies of Greek theater didn't just entertain. They poked at power, mocked the mighty, and reminded everyone, especially the lowliest, that the gods might laugh, fate might bend, and sorrow could be sung into beauty. You take a seat among the crowd. A chorus enters their voices, rising in rhythmic unity, speaking not for themselves, but for all. The hero stumbles, a king, or a nobody, it doesn't matter. His fall will reflect yours. His choices mirror fears you've never spoken aloud. The playwright, perhaps Euripides or Sophocles, makes you feel understood, even if only through metaphor. One curious tradition, actors wore large masks, exaggerated expressions frozen in wood and linen. They amplified voices, yes, but also allowed anonymity, so a low-status man might become a god, or a woman, or a ghost. In this space, identity blurred, and everyone became someone else. Scholars note that festivals like the Dionysia, where these plays were performed, drew massive crowds from every class. Entrance fees were even subsidized so that the poorest citizens could attend. For one day, all were equal in the eyes of the muse. And it wasn't just drama. Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, were recited at gatherings, festivals, banquets. You imagine a blind bard plucking a lyre, his voice trembling as he tells of ships and storms, loyalty and loss. Children memorized these stories. Soldiers carried verses in their heads. Housewives hummed snatches while grinding grain. For a society built on hierarchy, Greek culture was surprisingly generous with imagination. A slave could quote Antigone. A merchant could debate the ethics of Ajax. A girl forbidden to vote might dream of being Atalanta swift and fierce, racing past all expectations. In a city where life expectancy rarely reached gray hair, where your birth defined your death, these tales gave people room to breathe. They imagined gods who failed mortals, who triumphed and endings that weren't always tragic. A peculiar little moment in one of Aristophanes' plays, a character climbs to the heavens to demand better laws from Zeus. It's absurd. It's hilarious. But also, what if you could, what if laughter could shift the world a little? You leave the theater late, the sky purple with stars. Around you, the city hums, slaves returning from errands, lovers whispering under doorways, dogs nosing through trash. Nothing has changed. And yet, something has shifted. For those few hours, everyone was more than their label. They were watchers, thinkers, dreamers. Even the illiterate knew the lines by heart. Even the voiceless could chant the chorus. As you wander through the silent agora, a breeze lifts your tunic, and you smile. In this harsh, limited, beautiful place, hope slipped in through stories. Not always loudly, not always kindly, but enough. Enough to carry you through porridge dinners and failed crops, through cracked rooftops and whispered prayers, through laws that denied you and dreams that did not. In ancient Greece, hardship was constant, but hope came in epics and plays and laughter and masks and verses recited long after the voices that wrote them had gone silent. And when the stories ended, daily life returned quietly, stubbornly. Hope gave way to habit. The amphitheater fades, and now it's dawn again, not for heroes or kings, but for those who simply get up and get going. You wake up to sound, not sunlight, because the sun hasn't risen yet. Somewhere beyond the thin stone walls of your tiny home, the chickens have already started their fussing. One in particular seems determined to outshout the others. It's always that one hen. Always. There are no windows to speak of, just a small gap near the roof line, letting in a streak of silver-black sky. The air is cold and carries the sharp sting of smoke from the hearth's dying coals. You curl forward, joints stiff, and grope for your tunic by feel wool, scratchy, and mended too many times to count. Beside you, someone stirs under the same thin blanket, your brother maybe, or your cousin, or both. Beds aren't assigned here. They're just piles of hay and worn linen shared out of necessity. Outside, a dog barks, once then settles. The faint sound of distant hooves, probably Makiros the neighbor heading out early to check on his vines. He always did over water. You stand finally and stretch. Your knees crackle like old amphorae. This too is normal. Most of your body has been aching since you were about 12. Still, you're lucky. At least you've got a roof and your own calluses instead of someone else's whip to fear. In the flickering glow of the rekindled fire, you find yesterday's sandals. Dust falls off them in little puffs like flour. You scratch your leg absent-mindedly and catch a flea another one. You toss it into the fire, which hisses but doesn't complain. The family goat, a moody creature with one good eye, waits by the door. She knows it's breakfast time, and she'll try to sneak in if you're not fast. You push past her with a muttered oxy, and she snorts in protest. She'll forgive you later, probably, especially if someone drops a lentil. Roosters strut nearby, now fully invested in their morning performance. There's no curtain call, no applause, just more noise. You grab the bucket and head toward the clay oven to start water boiling. Not for tea. Tea isn't a thing here. But maybe to soften stale bread, or just warm your fingers. There's debate among scholars whether rural Greek peasants kept consistent sleeping routines, especially during non-harvest months. Some argue they followed the sun strictly, while others think they napped in intervals. You'd nap too, if only the chickens allowed it. The faintest orange blush begins to spread across the horizon, as you crouch by the hearth. Yesterday's ashes still hold a few stubborn embers, so with practiced hands you coax them into flame, a few twigs, a puff of breath, then the reassuring crackle of fire. The light dances on the rough stone walls, painting long, flickering shadows of your own fingers as you reach for the cooking pot. You move slowly, not because there's time to waste, but because it's still too early for your joints to move quickly. The pot is half full from last night's rinse, and with a practiced tilt, you set it on the tripod over the flames. No rushing. The water will boil when it wants to. Beside the hearth, a small shelf holds a few objects that don't do much, but they matter. A worn wooden idol, maybe Hermes or Hestia, blackened slightly from smoke. A clump of dried lavender hung for luck. A cracked dish with a coin that's more symbol than savings. You whisper a few words, something between a prayer and a hope. There's no priest here, just you, and the coals, and whatever gods might be half listening. Then breakfast, if you can call it that. You pull yesterday's bread from its cloth wrap. It's hard as a roof tile. You set it in a bowl and pour in a splash of wine thin sour, barely more than grape-flavored vinegar. The bread floats for a second, then sinks with a soft gulp. That's your meal. No honey. No olives yet. Maybe if the harvest is kind, there'll be cheese next week. But not today. Someone else shuffles in behind you. Your aunt, your cousin, maybe just a neighbor who slept over after a storm. She grunts. You grunt. That's conversation enough. The two of you take turns tearing at the soggy bread in silence, chewing without fanfare. Outside, a rooster has declared victory over the morning and is now trying to woo a hen with comically poor results. You sip the last of your wine-soaked crust and feel the familiar weight of another day settling on your shoulders. The kind of weight that isn't dramatic or dreadful, just dense. Like wool in summer. Like chores that never end. The family's youngest, barely old enough to carry a jar, toddles in and immediately trips on the hearthstone. You catch her just in time, plopping her on your knee while she yells at the injustice of walking. You bounce her a little while, pointing to the steam now rising from the pot. She quiets, transfixed. Fire is magic to the young. For the rest of you, it's just another thing to manage. Historians still argue over how much religious ritual penetrated everyday rural Greek life. Was every meal truly blessed? Were the gods invoked every time the pot boiled? Or were some of these motions just habits, like scratching your nose or nodding politely to the sky? You couldn't say. You've been doing the same thing every morning for as long as you've had teeth. With a final sip of warm water and bread goo, you hand off the toddler to someone better suited for morning patience and step outside into the chill. The fields are still in shadow. The air smells like smoke dust and the faintest trace of time. Another day begins not with fanfare or fate, but with damp bread, quiet prayers, and a small fire that, like you, just keeps going. The pot is empty, and the bread is gone. Now comes the most repetitive and yet completely essential task of the day, fetching water. Not from a convenient spigot, of course. There's no plumbing in your home, unless you count the narrow trench outside that carries rainwater past the goats. You shoulder the amphora, its clay surface cool against your skin, and step carefully onto the dirt path. Already, others are moving in the same direction. A cousin, with two smaller jugs, balanced across her back. A neighbor boy, dragging a bucket that will surely tip over at least once. It always does. The village fountain stands at the edge of the agora, fed by a spring whose source is either a miracle or an engineering mystery, depending on who you ask. A trickle, at best, it means there's always a line. But no one complains. Complaining takes energy, and energy is worth more than salt. The morning air smells faintly of olives and sheep, and your sandals scuff against the dry ground. Bees hover lazily around thyme blossoms by the roadside, and somewhere ahead you can hear someone already muttering about taxes. That's a conversation for later. The fountain appears a squat stone basin, surrounded by dusty footprints and pebbles, polished smooth by centuries of waiters, no, not servers, but people who wait. You greet an older woman with a nod. She gestures at the trickle, like it personally insulted her. You both smile slightly. The joke is always the same. The spring was faster when we were younger. Maybe it was. Maybe not. When your turn comes, you lower the jug slowly into the cool basin, tilting it with practiced care to avoid stirring up the sediment. It fills inch by inch. You kneel beside it, adjusting your tunic so the hem doesn't soak through. Across from you, two girls whisper and giggle. You pretend not to listen, but it's clearly about someone's brother and possibly a stolen fig. Once the amphora is full, you hoist it onto your shoulder. The weight settles awkwardly, but not unfamiliar. You've done this 100 times, and you'll do it 100 more. The path home seems longer now, or maybe your legs just notice the incline more than they did 10 years ago. On the way back, you pass a man repairing a fence with rope that's more knot than thread. He glances up, nods, and says something about goats. You can't hear it, but it doesn't matter. You smile anyway. There's no great danger on this walk, no epic trial. Just the chance of a dropped jug, or a stubbed toe, or a goose deciding you look like a rival. That happened once. You don't like to talk about it. Some scholars remain puzzled by how water collection shaped community dynamics in ancient villages. Was it mostly women's work, shared by all? Did it foster gossip or silence? You suspect it did all of the above, depending on the mood the season, and whether someone's mother-in-law was watching. Back home, you set the jug down beside the hearth. A hand reaches out, maybe your uncle, maybe your sister, and pours a small cup before you even wipe the sweat from your brow. Then someone says it. We'll need more for the washing. And just like that, you sigh and reach for the second jug. Because of course you'll go again. The sun is properly up now, not high enough to bake, but enough to wake the flies. They swirl lazily around your ears as you step into the field. It's not far. Nothing in the village ever is. But the journey still takes effort. A stone here, a tuft of stubborn grass. They're all reminders that land is generous only when bullied into cooperation. Today, it's the olive trees that demand attention. Gnarled and silver-leaved, they line the edge of the field like old soldiers too proud to fall over. You pat one on the trunk as you pass. It doesn't thank you, but you like to imagine it does. It's older than you, possibly older than your grandfather. Maybe even older than the idea of your grandfather. You bend down to clear debris from the base of a vine barley, this time dry and determined. It hasn't rained in a week, and the cracked soil is evidence of both the weather and your stubborn persistence. You tilt your head and squint at the clouds, or where clouds should be. Nothing yet. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe not. Your hands get to work without thinking. Pulling weeds, scooping earth, checking stems for pests. It's all the same rhythm, all the same tempo. There's no concept of vacation, and day off is a phrase for richer tongues. But there's something honest about farming. The land doesn't lie. It's either growing or it isn't. Nearby, another field belongs to a man named Diodoros. He's not home right now. His son said something about a pottery shipment. You hope he's getting paid this time. You once watched Diodoros spend 3 months growing the finest grapes in the village, only to have a hailstorm reduce them to mush. He just stood there soaked and blinking and said, "Well, the gods blinked first." Quirky sayings are a currency out here, better than coins sometimes. You hear one now from behind, "Don't plow before the roosters," had his say, muttered by your cousin, hauling a basket of tools. She's always been good with timing. Not with goats, though. They chase her, and not the affectionate way. You laugh under your breath and keep working. The sweat begins to bead at your temples. Your tunic sticks to your back, and your fingers turn the color of soil. The wind is almost too lazy to blow, but you catch a whiff of fennel somewhere. That's pleasant, at least. There's a debate among archaeologists about whether ancient Greek peasants felt ownership over their land or simply borrowed it from season to season under pressure from wealthier landlords. The truth likely lies in the gray zone. Some ownership, some obligation, and a whole lot of "don't make the tax man angry." Hours pass in this sun-soaked routine. Pull, plant, clear. You forget to curse your aching back until someone yells from the path, "Lunch soon." You straighten, stretching one arm above your head and hearing 3 distinct pops from your shoulder. The field blurs slightly as you blink dust from your eyes. But there's more to do. There's always more. One last row. One last weed. One more chance to prove that today, at least the cracked earth will let something live. You glance toward the olives again. They don't nod. But you imagine they would if they could. The sun climbs higher, bringing with it a change in atmosphere, not just heat, but tension. There's a certain stillness that creeps into the village when rumors of officials linger in the air. Today, as you return from the fields, that stillness is unmistakable. It clings to walls and follows footsteps. Someone saw a tax collector on the road from the city. Or maybe it was just a merchant. Or maybe someone's cousin invented the whole thing for attention. Doesn't matter. You straighten your tunic anyway. You pass 3 neighbors, pretending not to be watching the road. One casually tending his fence post for the 3rd time this week. Another sweeping the same patch of dirt. Everyone is busy, but just enough to look occupied, not so much as to invite interest. At the village square, you spot them. 2 men in short chitons, one holding a scroll, the other holding a spear. Not a threatening spear, but an official one, ornamental, but meaningful. They're flanked by a 3rd man, whose job appears to be standing and looking important. None of them smiles. One scratches at his chin, then frowns at the scroll, as if the ink personally offended him. You duck into a side path. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because interacting with tax collectors is like arguing with goats, noisy, unrewarding, and they might bite. Better to be elsewhere when they start counting livestock or measuring grain storage that may or may not exist. Behind you, a rooster crows again. It's the same overconfident one from earlier, and somehow his timing feels sarcastic. You make your way to the pottery shed, ducking through a low doorway, half covered in drying herbs. Inside, the air is cooler, the walls thick with soot and silence. A few other villagers are here pretending to check on clay jars or adjust storage bins. You exchange quiet nods. No one mentions the men outside. Some scholars continue to debate whether rural Greek communities had structured resistance to taxation or simply survived by collective avoidance. There's evidence for both village records that mysteriously went missing ledgers, filled with suspicious gaps, and entire goat herds that apparently wandered off the day before a census. You crouch by a crate and pretend to inspect an amphora. It's cracked like most of them and smells faintly of last season's oil. Outside, a voice calls out a name, not yours, thank the gods, and there's the sound of footsteps, then fading conversation. Someone else's problem for now. After a few minutes, a friend leans in from the doorway. Gone, he whispers, holding up two fingers in a just missed 'em gesture. Everyone relaxes a bit, though no one fully unclenches. You stand stretch and wipe your hands on your tunic. Dust rises as always. Your stomach growls, reminding you that adrenaline is not a substitute for lentils. Historians may never fully grasp how fear and routine coexisted in these communities, how daily life kept moving even when officialdom threatened to unravel it. You suspect the answer lies in the very dust now coating your arms, clingy constant and impossible to fully scrub away. You head back into the light, squinting as the sun glares down, like it too demands tribute. Maybe it does. Maybe everyone's a tax collector in their own way. The afternoon sun slants across the village, drawing sharp shadows from every cracked pot and crooked beam. Most of the field work pauses for now. Too hot, too dry, too dusty. But rest is a luxury, and clay doesn't mold itself. You head to the pottery shed, ducking under the hanging strings of garlic that someone insists will ward off bad spirits, or at least bad customers. Inside, the air smells like earth and ash, like sweat baked into wood, like work. The wheel sits at the center, silent for now. You nod at another artisan, already hunched over a lopsided bowl that refuses to behave. She doesn't look up. There's clay under her fingernails and frustration in her posture. You know the feeling. You take your place near the window, where the light is better. A lump of clay sits waiting slightly dry at the edges. You wet your hands from the chipped basin and begin the rhythm that's older than city's slap center spin shape. It's a dance between firmness and finesse, between pressure and patience. The first pot collapses. Of course it does. You mutter something halfway between a prayer and a curse and start again. This time, the shape holds. Round base, rising walls, a lip that doesn't quite wobble. Good enough for oil. Or maybe wine. Or maybe to hold nothing but dust and dead bees. That's fine too. Buyers don't always know what they need. There's talk in the corner about a shipment to the coast, maybe Corinth, maybe even farther. A merchant came through last week with promises and thin coin. You didn't sell anything, but he complimented your jugs. You're not sure if he meant it. A teenager walks by outside shouting about figs. You hear laughter. It could be real, or it could be nervous. Laughter is flexible in a village like this. Inside, the wheel spins slower, now your hands moving automatically. You shape a small bowl thumbprint embedded near the base. Not a signature exactly, but a mark. Yours. Quiet. Imperfect. Researchers still debate how much peasant artisans earned from their wares. Some say enough to survive, others argue it barely offset the time lost from farming. There's truth in both views. You sell 3 bowls one week, none the next. But the clay doesn't stop appearing under your nails, and your spine doesn't stop aching from hunching. You pause to stretch, feeling the pull in your lower back. The window lets in a sharp breeze that scatters some of the dust. It's not much, but enough to clear your throat and your thoughts. Then you hear it, the soft thud of a pot breaking behind you. No curses, no tears, just a long, quiet sigh. Someone else's work now fragments. You know better than to comment. You just offer a rag. She takes it with a nod and starts over. That's how it goes in the pottery shed. Nothing dramatic, nothing poetic. Just clay spinning, drying, cracking, selling. Repeat. You finish your last bowl of the day, an uneven shape, but charming. Maybe. You place it on the shelf, where dozens more crowd for space, like people at the Agra. No one's sure which ones will sell, or when. But you made something today, and sometimes that's enough. There's a quieter rhythm just beyond the pottery shed one, without spinning wheels or cracked clay. In the dappled shade of the courtyard fig tree, the women gather not to talk, though there's plenty of that, but to spin. Wool, mostly, sometimes flax. Always the same simple tools, drop spindles, calloused fingers, and patience that outlasts the afternoon sun. You settle nearby on a low stool. Not to watch exactly, but because there's nowhere else to sit, and the spinning feels almost hypnotic. A spindle twirls, the wool stretches, a thread is born. Again and again. One woman hums off key, but persistent. Another frowns at a knot. The youngest tries to sneak in a laugh without dropping her spindle. She fails, of course, and the others chuckle softly, like wind through barley. There's no loom here, those are inside, where the frames can stand tall without fear of wind or wandering goats, but the thread must come first. And thread doesn't care about heat or boredom. It demands time. A basket sits beside you filled with raw wool. It smells faintly of lanolin and last season's storm. You reach in and pull a tuft free. It clings to your fingers, soft and stubborn. You rub it between your palms. The fibers fray, then align. Not perfect, but workable. Spinning isn't glamorous. No one sings heroic songs about spindle work. But without these threads, no one eats, sleeps, or survives. Tunics, cloaks, bags, sails, it all begins here under a fig tree with a joke about someone's snoring uncle and a spindle that just won't behave. Some historians argue that rural Greek women held more economic power than previously believed, especially through textile work. Others insist their labor was invisible, absorbed into household survival without recognition. Either way, the thread keeps moving. A bee buzzes lazily overhead. Someone shoos it with a spindle and nearly drops her yarn. Laughter bubbles again, low, warm, unhurried. Even the goat nearby seems to snort approvingly. The wind shifts slightly, carrying the scent of roasted onions and olive oil. Evening isn't far now. One of the women glances at the sky and murmurs something about the gods and laundry. Everyone nods like she's made a profound point, though no one quite knows what she meant. You watch the threads pile in baskets, whites, grays, a few dyed strands of rust or indigo. They'll be woven into something soon. Not beautiful, necessarily, but sturdy, warm, real. The sun lowers itself behind the hills, lighting the courtyard in amber. You stand and stretch. Your back makes the same complaint it always does. One woman hands you a spindle, unfinished thread still dangling, and says, "Finish it tomorrow." You nod, knowing you will. Or someone will. The spindle doesn't care who finishes the thread. As you walk away, you look back, once. The women keep spinning. The shade deepens. The hum continues. And the thread, like the day goes on, the last heat of the day, clings to your skin as you step toward the communal fountain. Not the drinking one, this one's for bathing. Sort of. Don't imagine marble statues and perfumed oils. Think stone basins, cold water, and the awkward shuffle of modesty mixed with necessity. You carry a cloth, a jug, and no illusions. Bathing here isn't luxurious. It's a chore, sandwiched between other chores. But dust is persistent and sweat leaves its mark. So you wait your turn, standing barefoot on warm stone, watching your breath puff slightly in the cooler evening air. A boy exits the fountain space, shaking like a wet dog. He grins through chattering teeth and yells colder than the mountain gods, you believe him. The spring that feeds this basin comes from somewhere deep, perhaps sacred, perhaps just shaded forever. When your turn comes, you enter slowly. The space is half-walled, semi-private, and fully echoey. Every splash sounds like a drum. You set down your things and dip a foot into the water. Your toes immediately try to retreat. Too late, you're committed. You ease in bit by bit. Water up to your knees, then your waist. Then with a sharp breath, you dunk your head. The cold bites, not angrily, but firmly. It reminds you that you're alive, that your skin is your skin, and that hygiene is a form of courage. You scrub with a cloth that smells vaguely of thyme and old goat. It works well enough. No soap here, just friction water and determination. You scrub behind your ears like your mother always nagged. She said it was where the gods checked for dirt. You never questioned it. Somewhere nearby, a woman laughs a sharp, honest bark of laughter. Probably slipped on a wet stone. No one rushes to help. If she's laughing, she's fine. Scholars still puzzle over bathing habits in rural Greek life. Were these basins daily stops? Weekly? Were they ritualistic? Or just muddy convenience? The records are fuzzy, and the truth likely varied from village to village, season to season. You finish your scrubbing and rise from the water, goosebumps covering every inch of you. There are no towels, only sun-warmed air, and the scratchy cloth you brought. You dry quickly, efficiently, before the chill sets in too deep. A neighbor steps in as you step out. He nods. You nod. That's the entire exchange. You leave him to the splashes and the echoes. As you dress again, your body feels lighter. Not clean exactly, but reset. The dust is gone for now. Your hair drips slightly onto your shoulders. You'll smell better at dinner. That's all that matters. You walk home slowly, sandals and hand feet, enjoying the freedom of dirt paths and soft dusk. Chickens cluck lazily from their coop. A dog barks at a passing goat. Somewhere a baby cries, then hiccups itself to sleep. The sun is nearly set now. The sky is bruised purple and gold. You pause near the fence, watching it fade. A breeze stirs the olive branches. You shiver not from cold, but from the weight of the day finally letting go. One bath, 1,000 steps, and still more to come. You wouldn't expect a 6-year-old to know how to wrangle goats, but in this village, age is measured less by years and more by how much you can carry guard or chase. Children don't get to be children for long. And even when they are, it's a dusty, barefoot kind of childhood, filled with chores disguised as games. You hear them before you see them, high-pitched squeals, the bleating of goats, and the unmistakable sound of someone falling into a patch of dry thistles. Again, you round the corner near the fig grove and spot the usual chaos. 3 kids covered in smudges dart between the olive trees, trying to herd a cluster of stubborn goats back toward the pen. The goats, of course, have other ideas. One is chewing on a tunic. Another has found a patch of oregano and refuses to leave it. The third stares defiantly at the smallest boy, who is taken to negotiating with it out loud, as if reason will sway a goat. You can't help but laugh quietly, though, because pride is a delicate thing at that age. One girl spots you watching and immediately puts her hands on her hips, striking a pose of exaggerated competence. You nod solemnly. Message received, She's got this. Children here learn early how to hold a spindle, how to carry water, how to collect firewood without splinters. But goat duty is a rite of passage. You don't officially belong to the village rhythm until you've been outsmarted by a horned animal at least twice. There's a toddler too young for goat duty sitting near a stump, chewing on what you hope is just a stick. His older brother runs past, yelling something about fences, and the little one claps delightedly. No one bothers with toys, stick stones, and imagination served just fine. Historians still discuss how ancient Greek childhoods varied by region and class. In cities, boys might learn letters. In villages, they learn goats. Both are tricky in different ways. And while formal schooling was rare instruction, never stopped. It just looked like life. You watch as the girl with the hands-on-hips stance successfully lures a goat back with a sprig of grapevine. She beams. Her triumph lasts about 7 seconds until another goat escapes through a gap in the fence someone forgot to fix. The chase resumes. From the shade, an older woman calls out in that tone that's not quite a shout, not quite a song. You forget your sandals again. One of the boys looks down at his bare feet and shrugs. The woman snorts and mutters about bruised toes and bruised pride. You squat beside the stump and help the toddler trade his stick for a fig. He accepts it with wide-eyed reverence, as though you've gifted him a temple offering, which in a way you have. There's a strange peace in this scene, dust swirling in sunbeams, small feet pounding dry earth goat bells, jingling like off-key music. Noisy, chaotic, full of scraped knees and triumphant grins, but peaceful all the same. Soon, someone will whistle the universal signal that it's time to wash up before dinner. The children will groan, the goats will scatter one last time, and the sun will inch lower. But for now, the herding continues. It's not perfect, it's not quiet, but it's theirs. The sun begins to droop behind the hills, casting the village in soft amber. This is when errands take on a strangely social quality, when a walk to the market becomes half about salt and half about stories. You grab your pouch light, enough to flap in the breeze, and head toward the agora. You don't need much. A pinch of seasoning, maybe a jar of oil. But you go anyway, because everyone else will be there too. The path is dusty, lined with stones that once might have been part of a wall, or maybe just rolled there centuries ago. Someone's selling onions again, loudly, as if volume makes them sweeter. A donkey, tied near the stalls, brays for no reason, and a child tries to bray back. The result is unsettling. You pass the man, who always sells salt, though no one's quite sure where he gets it. The sea's not exactly nearby, and he's not exactly a sailor. He greets you with the usual line, "Best salt, east of Delphi." You nod, knowing full well it tastes like every other batch. The market's layout never changes, though the faces sometimes do. Clay pots arranged like sleepy guards, baskets of lentils, garlic, maybe a few bruised figs. If someone has fish, it's a big day. Today, no fish. Just the faint scent of fish that once existed here. But this isn't just a market. It's a stage. You stop at a table stacked with cabbages and pretend to inspect them while overhearing the real commerce gossip. Did you hear about Aeson's daughter? One woman whispers, voice hushed, but posture alert. Ran off with the guy from the hill village, the one with the funny sandals. No. Yes, I knew those sandals were trouble. The conversation spins outward, pulling in nearby ears like leaves in a whirlpool. You contribute nothing, but your eyes widen at the right moments, and someone nods approvingly. Elsewhere, a group of old men plays a slow, sleepy game involving stones and muttered threats. No one wins. No one remembers the rules. That's not the point. You buy salt eventually. It's wrapped in a bit of rough cloth handed off with a wink. You tuck it into your pouch like it's precious. And in a way it is. Not because it flavors food, but because it flavored a conversation. Some historians wonder how much political knowledge filtered through village gossip. Did people understand? Who ruled? Who paid tribute to whom? Or did it all reduce to whose goat wandered into whose garden? And whether someone's cousin cheated at dice? The evidence suggests both, and it depends on how much wine was involved. You pass the olive seller who tries to get you to taste one. You pretend to consider. Then he admits their last week's batch. You both laugh, and he throws one in free. Someone's child darts past, nearly knocks over a basket of beans, and vanishes behind a stall. The vendor sighs and continues his pitch to a woman who's clearly already bought what she came for, but lingers anyway. Just like you. As twilight deepens, the stalls begin to pack up. You've spent only a few coins, but gained 3 rumors, 1 free olive, and a vague suspicion about a neighbor's new sandals. You walk home slowly, savoring the fading light. Salt tucked under your arm. Pockets full of nothing and everything. Back home with twilight, smudging the sky. It's time to tend to the quietest gods. Not Zeus, not Athena, not the ones with temples and fanfare, but the tiny household deities who expect small things, crumbs, coins, whispers. You step inside and close the creaky wooden door with the soft thunk of routine. The hearth flickers low, casting dancing shadows against the wall, where your family's shrine sits a niche barely bigger than a handspan. It's humble, a blackened figure made from clay, 2 pebbles arranged like eyes, a dried olive branch stuck behind them. No one remembers exactly which god it's meant to be anymore. Some say Hestia, goddess of the hearth. Others insist it's Hermes, because a traveler once left a coin here and then didn't die on the mountain road. Either way, the god has been fed ever since. You kneel briefly, more from custom than devotion. The smell of old ash and time clings to everything. You place a scrap of bread by the shrine, not the best piece, just enough to count. Next to it, a sliver of fig. And then a whispered line, half a blessing, half a plea, for luck and for fewer fleas. One of the children tiptoes up beside you with a broken button holding it out solemnly. You nod, and she places it next to the bread, as if it's a jewel. Maybe it is in her world. You ruffle her hair, and she darts away, already forgetting the offering. Somewhere in the house, someone drops a spoon. It clatters like a cymbal and sets off a brief flurry of apologies. The shrine remains unfazed. Clay gods don't flinch. Outside the door, the night begins humming. Crickets the rustle of vines, the distant bray of a mule who dreams too loudly. Inside the shrine glows faintly, from a small oil lamp, just enough light to keep the spirits from bumping into the furniture, or so your grandmother always said. There's debate among scholars about the role of household religion in ancient Greece. Was it a core part of identity or merely habit? Did people truly believe, or did belief matter less than participation? The records mostly burned, buried, or never written leave more questions than answers. What you know is this: the bread's always gone by morning. Whether it's eaten by God's mice or children pretending to be gods. Well, some mysteries are best left undisturbed. You add a few drops of wine to the offering plate, watch it soak into the worn wood below. It smells like vinegar. That seems appropriate. Life here is often a bit sour, but it lingers, doesn't it? A gust sneaks through the cracks in the wall and makes the lamp flicker. The shadows of the shrine dance like they've been waiting all day. You take a moment to sit. Just sit. Your knees creak. Your back protests. The floor is unforgiving, but it's quiet. It's yours. Outside, the moon has slipped into view, low and pale. A soft bell sounds from somewhere near the goat pen, or maybe it's just the wind playing with the tools. You rise slowly, offering one last glance to the shrine. The clay god stares back unmoved, and yet somehow satisfied. You nod just once. That's the whole ritual. Then it's time to think about dinner. Dinner in your household arrives without ceremony, just the scent of something bubbling faintly, and a few grumbles of hunger echoing off stone walls. There's no feast, no servant slicing lamb from a spit. There is, however, a pot slightly scorched on one side, filled with something thick and brownish. You hope it's beans. You're almost certain it's beans. You help carry it to the center of the room, placing it on a flat stone warmed by the hearth. A few hunks of bread, some stale, some recently rescued, from being completely fossilized, are stacked beside it. You pick one and break it in half. Dust, not steam, drifts upward. Still it's food. Everyone gathers slowly. Someone sneezes. Someone else slaps at a fly and misses. One child arrives with a fig in her hand and a look that says she earned it. Maybe she did. Maybe she just knew where the tree bent low. There's no table, only knees and bowls, and the gentle clatter of wooden spoons. You ladle out portions with practiced generosity, a little more for the elders, a little less for the goat chasers. The beans are salted just enough to taste like intention, not luxury. A thin smear of cheese appears, a crumbly bit saved from yesterday's market splurge. It disappears quickly. No ceremony, just gratitude. You chew in silence for a while, listening to the background music of dinner lips smacking quiet sighs, a toddler gurgling something that might be a song. Someone spills a few lentils. A dog licks them up before anyone notices. There's a kind of peace in this moment, rough-edged but real. No one's talking about taxes now, or broken spindles, or gods with too many opinions. Just beans, bread, and if you're lucky, one fig. You catch someone cutting theirs in half, offering the smaller piece to a sibling. It's not magnanimity, it's strategy. The smaller half disappears first, which means they get to savor the second without negotiation. Some scholars remain uncertain about how common meat was in peasant diets. The records suggest occasional fish, rare poultry, and the Holy Grail lamb. But here tonight, meat is a rumor told by stew. What you have instead is consistency. Beans don't disappoint. Figs don't argue. Bread, though hard, doesn't judge. A cousin offers a toast with a chipped clay cup. No wine left, but the gesture gets a chuckle. To the beans that bind us, he declares, you raise your bowl in mock solemnity. So does the toddler, who promptly spills hers. No one scolds. That's tomorrow's laundry problem. As plates empty, spoons slow down. The chewing gets lazier. The oil lamp glows a little brighter now that dusk is thick and stars are peeking through the ceiling gap. You lean back, balancing on an elbow full in that strange way where you're not quite satisfied, but you know, this is as good as it gets today. Which is fine. You had worse last week. You might have better next. Someone tells a story about a goat who ate a sandal. Someone else adds that the goat looked ashamed afterward. Everyone agrees that's nonsense, but also possibly true. And just before the last crust is claimed, the dog belches. Loudly. Everyone laughs. Dinner is done. The food is gone. The bowls are stacked. The air smells faintly of oil smoke and fennel rubbed from someone's sleeve. It's time for stories. The lamp is lit just one, and its weak flame casts lazy shadows along the walls. Everyone finds a place to sit against the hearth on woven mats propped up by sacks of barley. The youngest still sticky from figs, the oldest already halfway dozing. You settle into your usual spot, back against the doorframe knees, tucked up one ear ready. Tonight, your uncle begins. His voice is gravel, wrapped in wool, rough but gentle. He opens with a line everyone knows. There once was a man who tried to steal the moon. That one. Again, you smile in spite of yourself. The story unfolds slowly, as it always does. The man builds a ladder of barley stalks, each one longer than the last. He climbs for days passing. Birds clouds the occasional goat that somehow ended up in the sky. When he reaches the moon, he whispers a secret, and it changes color, just for him. You've heard this tale since you were small enough to believe it entirely. Now you just enjoy the rhythm, the way the pauses hang like ripe fruit, the way someone always interrupts to ask, but how did he breathe up there? And the storyteller sighs as if this is the first time anyone's asked. After that, someone else takes a turn, a cousin trying to be clever. She tells the one about the olive tree that walked away from its field, tired of being picked. It wandered into town, disguised itself as a man, and got a job as a tax collector. The room erupts with quiet chuckles. Even the dog groans theatrically. Some scholars argue that oral storytelling in ancient rural communities was more than entertainment. It was social glue, a way to remember, to warn, to wonder. Others suggest it was a form of rehearsal for real-life wrapping truth in absurdity, so it could be swallowed more easily. You don't know which is right. You just know you feel warmer now than you did before the tale began. Next comes a tragic fable. A young girl who fell in love with a fish. The fish promised her the sea. She waited at the shore every night until her hair turned white and her bones turned to salt. And now the storyteller says, lowering her voice, that shore has no waves, only silence. No one speaks for a few seconds. Just the soft hiss of the lamp. Then someone, probably your brother, whispers, "Should have picked a goat." The spell breaks. Laughter bubbles again. Stories roll out like wool from a spindle, some long, some short, all slightly frayed at the edges. A few are clearly nonsense. Others feel half-remembered from a dream. That's part of the charm. Even the children begin to chime in now. A boy swears he saw a satyr near the vines last week. Someone else says they once met Hermes disguised as a chicken. It's a lie, obviously, but told with conviction. And really, who's to say you yawn behind your hand? Someone else has already nodded off mid-sentence. The storyteller trails off, murmuring something about stars turning to olives if you squint just right. The oil in the lamp sputters gently. No one calls an end to story time. It simply fades. Outside, the village exhales. A gentle hush settles, not silence, but a softer kind of noise. Crickets begin their evening chorus. A dog snorts in its sleep. From one corner of the house, an elderly aunt murmurs a prayer to no one in particular. You stretch out on your mat near the doorway, the stone floor still holding a faint trace of the day's heat. Thin walls, barely mud and straw, do little to muffle the symphony of neighbors winding down. You can hear someone hiccuping through laughter 2 doors down. A couple argues and whispers about where the good blanket went. A baby squeals, then quiets after a long, exaggerated shushing. This is night in a Greek peasant village. Not quiet, just familiar. The scent of olive oil clings to everything. It's in your hair, on your clothes, embedded in the walls. So are the echoes of footsteps, murmured secrets, and the lingering rhythms of pots being stacked after dinner. Nothing truly ends here, it just softens. You close your eyes, briefly hoping sleep might visit early. It doesn't. A goat bleats somewhere outside its voice, low and dramatic. A door creaks in response. Then a rooster lets out a confused crow, immediately shushed by someone throwing a sandal. You smile in the dark. Roosters never know when to quit. Someone walks past your house, their sandals scuffing against the dirt. From the sound, you'd guess it's Thanos, the baker's son. He walks like he's always late, even when he's not. The dogs bark, once recognize him, and fall silent again. Inside, your family settles into a patchwork of sleep limbs draped across each other, soft snoring, overlapping like an off-key chorus, the occasional sigh or mumble. You shift to find the cool part of the mat. There isn't one, but there is a slight breeze pushing through the cracks in the wall, and you position your face toward it like a sunflower chasing moonlight. Historians often overlook the sensory texture of peasant homes, the layers of noise scent movement that made up these nights. Records don't mention the way a child's foot might end up in your ribs, or how you'd sometimes wake up with your cheek pressed against the family dog. But these are the truths people lived. You hear the rustle of someone climbing onto the roof, a cousin maybe, or just a neighbor escaping the heat. Roof sleeping is an art form, cooler, quieter, and just dangerous enough to feel like an adventure. You made the mistake once of trying it during goat breeding season. Never again. A sudden gust rattles the hanging herbs. Someone mutters a protective charm without opening their eyes. The gods are still listening after all, especially at night. In the dark, you can make out the outlines of familiar things. The jug near the hearth, the broken spindle hung on the wall, the sandals you'll wear again tomorrow. Each object hums with its own quiet presence, as though waiting with you for morning. You hear your name, spoken in a dream voice nearby. You don't respond. Let them dream. Let them mumble. Let the night hold whatever it needs to hold. And still, through it all, the barking, the breeze, the breath of sleeping bodies, you feel something solid beneath the noise. Home. It always ends the same way. The final breath before dawn, when even the loudest goat falls quiet. The lamp has long gone out, burned to the last drop of oil, and you lie still in the gloom, watching shadows rearrange themselves into nothing. Your eyes are closed, but your mind is not. Not yet. This is the hour of drifting thoughts, soft, tangled, uneasy. You try to catalog what tomorrow needs: more water, fix the fence, maybe patch your tunic. You wonder if the fig tree will drop fruit soon. You hope the chickens stay in their pen this time. You doubt it. Somewhere outside, the breeze has stilled. The air hangs heavy now, thick with the scent of old firewood and damp earth. A moth flutters against the wall. A dog groans in its sleep. Someone coughs. Then silence returns. You shift slightly, trying not to wake the body curled beside you. Maybe your brother. Maybe your cousin. Maybe a neighbor who wandered in after too much wine. It doesn't matter. Everyone here overlaps. People blur into each other, just like the days do. You reach toward the shrine in the dark. Not to pray exactly, but to reassure yourself it's still there. The small offerings, bread crusts, fig stems, a coin with a scratch down its center, are where you left them. You touch the edge of the stone and murmur something simple, not elegant, Just let the goats stay in. Let the roof hold. The gods don't answer, of course. They rarely do. But the ritual helps. The same way brushing ash from your sleeves helps. The same way telling a story, even badly, helps. These things make order out of noise. You think of the day, just lived the water fetched and spilled the spinning spindle, the cracked pot, the tax collector's scroll, the toddler's sticky grin. It all blurs together, like a mosaic viewed too close, just colored pieces, hard to parse. But from a distance, it's a picture, a life. Some researchers still debate what peasants truly feared most: poverty punishment gods or each other. The records are uneven. Some say it was divine wrath that haunted their dreams. Others insist it was the next dry season, the next illness, the next knock at the door. You suspect the truth is simpler people feared change, and yet they feared stasis too. The delicate balance between the two is where they lived. You turn onto your side, pulling your scratchy blanket higher. The night wraps around you like wool, slightly itchy, slightly comforting. Sleep teases the edge of your consciousness, then recedes. A rooster somewhere stirs but doesn't crow. Not yet. In the dark, someone whispers a half-dream words that make no sense, names that aren't real. A child kicks out a foot. A log in the hearth cracks. Life continues. Tomorrow, the routine will begin again. Chickens, bread, water, soil, stories, thread, beans, goats, dust, hope, always hope. Because despite the aches, despite the uncertainty, despite the gods and their whims, you rise, you offer, you gather, you go. And every night ends like this, a final flicker of consciousness, a muttered plea to whatever listens, and the heavy, ancient quiet of sleep pressing gently against your thoughts. It's not peace, exactly, but it's close enough. The world outside your window might still be spinning fast, still buzzing with noise and worry. But here, in the dust of ancient fields and flickering firelight, time slows. You've walked the paths of the forgotten held, their tools tasted, their food listened to their stories. You've touched their fears and hopes quiet as they were. Now, let it all drift away. Feel the cool clay under your fingertips, the soft thud of bare feet on dry earth, the low hum of goats in the distance. Let it blur. Let it fade. And if the gods are listening, may they grant you rest, even without figs or offerings.